All right, welcome everybody. We have another K-12 politics and tech update. It's been a really big week, and we are very happy to have Andrea Bennett back, the executive director of Site. Andrea, welcome. Glad to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And of course, Kevin Gordon, Capital Advisors. Glad you're here, Kevin, and lots happening yesterday. Can you talk to us a little bit about the May revise and just some of the big news that came out of Sacramento?
Yeah, we are going to obviously not take this whole session to do the excruciating detail in the May revise, but to just talk about a couple of key points that we want everybody to sort of keep in mind. And that is sort of our overarching theme and reaction, which is that what's being asked of us in this May revision is really counter to what's being asked of us by our communities, really the legislature and the governor, kind of in a different venue, which is on the whole issue of COVID, that we're supposed to be preparing to reopen. And we've got all of these costs that are involved with reopening, very serious costs. Starts with PPE, but if we can't load our classes the way we would, we have smaller class sizes. We can't load the buses the way we would. We're going to have to do more trips. We've got meal serving issues. We've got all kinds of different issues that involve obviously increased costs, the least of which is on the technology side. And shouldering all of that and being told to maybe even possibly open early or do learning loss or do all these things with the largest cuts to education in state history is just a conflict where we cannot manage both. We cannot manage a serious budget cutting mode of that dimension and do these other things that we're trying to do to ultimately return to a normal classroom kind of setting sometime in the next year. It's just not going to happen. So we're obviously going to have the imperative of communicating that to policymakers. That's going to be a really important element of it. Our budget workshops, which we're going to be having, you can go to the Capital Advisors website to see the budget workshops that'll start next week. We'll get into a lot more detail about the May revision and what's going on. We know that when you take a look at the governor's overall strategy here, he leverages really big time this entire budget and the prospects of cuts on the potential that we may get relief from the feds. And so there's a major bill, you probably are aware of this, the HEROES Act, that it's making its way through the House of Representatives. We expect a vote today. That bill will get passed. It will go over to the U.S. Senate where it will hit a brick wall. It's a $3 trillion stimulus package that would be the fifth of the different stimulus packages. And it has $500 billion in it to help states, $100 billion to help it would also help schools. So you've got these things going on. It would erase basically most of the cuts that we would be facing in actual program at the local school level if we were to get it. So it'd be really important to get it, but we've got a long way to go in terms of the politics of Washington, D.C. to get there.
Hey Kevin, can I ask you because there's a lot happening in DC and Sacramento, so we're trying to wrap our heads around it. There's an aspect of the CARES Act which you're pointing out, 100 billion potentially for education, and but I'm also hearing about education specific stimulus package. Governor Wise had kind of mentioned that. Can you talk about maybe the similarities or differences between the two and how we can try to support those?
Super good point is there is on a separate track legislation that would just be for schools in terms of a bailout. I think everybody knows that the president has said he's not in favor of a state and local bailout package. So it makes sense that there's a separate track running that would have a bill advanced by the Council of Great City Schools, $175 billion that would go to schools only. There are other bills that do different kinds of things, but it is its own legislation. And we think it makes sense, obviously, to be supporting both. And in correspondence that we've drafted that we can certainly make available to folks, we've shared it with all of our clients where they can lobby the federal government on this issue in the HEROES Act. And it covers a lot of these different points. But there is that other track going too, and we want to be supportive of that with our members of Congress as well. So good point. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. And Andrea, we're really glad that you're here. people are leaning so heavily on technology and the tech teams that support them these days, and you are the organization that supports all the the technology ecosystem within this massive state. I know you've seen economic downturns before, and as people are starting to really brace themselves for what's coming, regardless of the support we get, I feel like we're going to be struggling a bit with the budgets. Can you talk about just what's some of your guidance to folks who are dealing with this for the first time, and how can they try to survive this in the best way possible?
Yeah, I just, I would encourage everyone to really just take a fresh look at the budget. Don't think about the same cuts that you've done in the past. Technology is so ubiquitous now. It's being used everywhere in places you might not even think. And, I truly hope that your transitions to online classrooms and online board meetings has gone smoothly. And if it did, just know that there's a ton of work going on in the background to make those happen, to make them safe and public. And to cut your technology department right now might create more problems for you than they're going to solve. So I would just say take a fresh look, put everything on the table, and see what you can do to continue to support the technology department.
Well, thanks, Andrea. And yeah, I think it's one thing that always keep in mind. Sometimes we don't really realize all the work that's going on in the background to keep things working. And the times you do notice it is when things go wrong. But let's celebrate the things that are going right. And as you said, now's the time to really probably think about investing more heavily in the team that's running technology, since your entire organization is relying on it to succeed right now. So I think that's wonderful advice. So Kevin, just kind of jumping back into some of the financial news, thinking about what we talked about last week with STRS and PERS. That was a big aspect of what the governor spoke about yesterday. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so we kind of won on this issue, and it's a significant issue. It's just overshadowed by the profound budget cuts overall, but it is an important move by the governor. As you guys all know, we were pushing really hard for a suspension of STRS and PERS increased obligations to schools over the next 2 years. And I think the systems, and I might have mentioned this on a prior broadcast, the two big systems, our pension systems, we're not real crazy about that idea because obviously it takes those payments we would otherwise be making, and without making those payments, it's not creating the return on investment that money sitting in there would create. So paying it would be certainly the first preference. We just didn't want to have to pay it out of school district budgets. So if there was another way to do it, we're all for it. And what the conversation did, because the field responded to our call in early April to suspend that obligation for 2 years, we had a lot of support going into this, and it forced them to really think about some way of achieving the same objective, which they have. The governor did have queued up in his January budget a plan to spend $2.3 billion on buying down out-year liabilities in the two systems. He basically just redirected that to focus on our liability, our increased costs over the next 2 years, the school districts, the employer share, and help us with that. So that's certainly good news, a bright spot in the budget overall. But again, as I said, the cuts overall are pretty daunting.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there's a lot of really tough decisions happening back there. And another one is, we spoke about it last week, is ADA versus enrollment, right? How to determine funding for next year. Can you talk about any progress in that regard this week?
I just wanted to mention that we are making progress on that. I think as early as last week when we did talk about it, I might have said that there was a lot of talk about moving to enrollment based, which I think makes a lot of sense for just a variety of reasons. But the most immediate problem we have could actually be solved by simply another executive order or action in the trailer bill that it would extend the hold harmless that we currently have on ADA. So that means you don't have the minutes or days requirements. It's not going to work next year to have the ADA funding model that we've always operated on. Just with the distance learning alone, and Andrea, I mean, you know this better than anybody, that it doesn't involve that seat time that we would otherwise be accountable for, and setting up some kind of accountability rubric for when we're doing the distance learning piece is complicated. So you have that. We know that there are going to be parents that are hesitant to send their kids back right away. They're going to be worried about that. We know that there's the possibility of more shutdown later in the year. An individual school gets a case of the virus. What is their reaction going to be? Not to mention the fires and the utility power shutoffs, and all kinds of reasons that demand that we look at this differently, but particularly next year. So what I wanted to tell you is that, we've gotten really great feedback from the leadership in both houses of the legislature and the governor's office. We think the consensus is there to absolutely move and do something on this. The real debate that's left is, which way do you go? Do we move to enrollment based now and make that jump, or do we do something that I think they have a lot of confidence in, they know that works, is simply a hold harmless on the ADA for next year? That's where I think it's going to end up. But I just want to let you know that we're reaching consensus on that issue. It's a real important thing for you to know. It's more important you to know as early as possible, so you guys can plan what you're going to be doing next year.
Well, we'll keep our eye on that, definitely, Kevin, because that's a really important aspect of being able to move forward. And, Andrea, I want to talk to you in that regard, just thinking about how some things need to change to address all remote staff and students and this new normal that we're going to be facing for the next 12, 18 months. Can you talk about, if you're an education leader and you need to focus on one thing with your tech team, what would one of those highest priority things be for you right now?
Oh, wow, so many. But I guess I would say first, take a look at your policies. We all have use policies in place, and they may not cover the whole new environment that we're in. So, check with your legal departments, look at those policies, make sure you're covered. There's so much to do, and you just want to make sure that everybody's clear about what the rules are, how they should be behaving, what they should be doing. And I think policies is a great place to start.
Yeah, I think looking over your policies and maybe thinking about going back and checking on them on a somewhat regular basis as things evolve, right? New legislation comes out, new regulations come out, and we might need to constantly evolve. So I think that's excellent advice, and you don't want to let those, you don't want to leave yourself exposed by not updating to what's happening in the world out there. So great feedback. We were talking a little bit before this, the three of us, and we were actually talking with Governor Wise, who's helped us kind of understand what's happening in DC a little bit, about some of the E-rate potential for getting some support for home access. And we're seeing, a little bit of support through Heroes for home access, but we're also seeing an initiative out there that is basically asking DC to support home access to the tune of about $5 billion. Andrea, can you talk through that a little bit and kind of what you're seeing?
There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different initiatives out there. We've been working with the Schools, Hospitals, and Library Broadband Coalition back in DC. They have a lot of support. They've got both a vendor community and school community and hospital community, obviously, and library community. And they do a lot of lobbying. And they've got an initiative out there, a petition out there for additional funding for schools, specifically for schools, and with specific amounts. 5.5 billion, I think, is the figure. And so we're helping back in DC. We did sign on to the letter that CAG folks wrote to Pelosi and McCarthy for the HEROES Act with very specific information about funding for education. We also wrote a letter to all of the ISPs here and doing business in California on behalf of site members, asking them to continue to support schools and not start charging for those hotspots that were given out. We think that they can look at things in a new way and continue to support schools, and we think that that's what they should do. And CAG helped us with that letter as well. We're also supporting SB 1130, which is some California funds here, $300 million available to kind of change the way those funds can be used through the California Advanced Services Fund, so that schools can use those a little bit more easily than they have been able to in the past. So So just a lot going on.
Yeah, no, thanks for pointing that out. And just to clarify, Kevin asked that we call out the specific bill, so thank you for doing that, Andrea. The bill that we were talking about, the $5 billion is or 5.5, excuse me, HR 6563. And Kevin, we heard from Bob that might meet a little bit of trouble back in DC. Can you talk about your thoughts on the likelihood of that happening and what hill it has to climb to be enacted?
Yeah. So, I mean, the HEROES Act by itself, again, it's a $3 trillion measure. And I know it's different than what you're talking about, but it's related. It's a $3 trillion measure. It's like 1,000 pages. It's got everything in the kitchen sink in it. Every single special interest group in the world has something in there. The piece that's on technology there is 1.5 billion versus the more meaningful bill that you're talking about, which is, I think you said 5.5 or something in that neighborhood. So what's going to happen is this is not going to get through the U.S. Senate, and a negotiation will begin. Having that second backup piece of legislation that makes a big deal about ed technology just leverages sort of the sentiment of different folks on a bipartisan basis. What are the issues that are important to you? So I wouldn't write it off that it ends up being carved way back. It's going to be part of the mix. And as long as we got that separate bill, we could always end up moving that forward to the degree that the HEROES Act ends up stumbling, or it all gets put into a bigger bill together that's the negotiated outcome of all the talks that are going to happen in Washington, D.C. So good legislation. We want to make sure we're supporting that as well.
Yeah, I want to just call out. Sorry, Andrea, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say it's having multiple funding streams and multiple people bring up bills that are specific to education is really, really helpful because having that same conversation come from different areas and different people is really what gets the attention back in Washington, D.C. So it's all good.
Yeah, I also want to point out that you mentioned the HR 6563, the 5.5 billion. Funds for Learning will help put the numbers together on what it would take to get that home access. Said it was in the order of 7.5 billion is what was needed. So even if you add those two numbers up, we're still a little bit short. So I think, like you said, some of the state funding that you're seeking, if we can advocate for, get those and package them together, we might really be able to put a dent into home access. So thank you for sharing on that. One thing I just wanted to put in a quick note, we called out the AP testing challenges that folks were having a couple of weeks ago, incompatibilities with operating systems. Those AP tests started in the last week and they've been going, unfortunately, there's been a lot of technical challenges with those. And for me, this is a big equity issue. In other words, if I'm counting on my AP test to help me differentiate myself from other students to get to the college I want to go to, that could impact my life and my career. And what we're seeing is kids are going to submit their tests and they're getting errors as they go to submit because technically on the other end they're having a hard time receiving all those tests at the same time. So because of technical challenges, some students may be at a disadvantage. And I would just ask, this is actually sort of a systemic challenge now. You got a testing company, you've got the colleges that need their scores to try to admit the students. I'm not sure the exact way to solve this, but there's been so much forgiveness in this regard lately. I would ask people to really think through the tight time frame, because May 26th is when these need to be completed by, and the impact that this could have on people's lives, and just ask people to have a little bit of grace in this process because there are significant technical challenges that are happening right now. And I just wanted to make everybody aware, if you're experiencing it, it's not just you. One other thing, just to kind of wrap up here, budget perspective workshops with Capital Advisors is happening next week. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about what you're expecting to see this week and then how people can find out how to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, so we got the workshops, and the thing that's really cool about it is that we've got a workshop across all of our county clients. So what we wanted to do when we put these together was make sure we weren't doing one big giant broadcast where you didn't feel like you were engaged or didn't have a local perspective. So we really are going to be doing one in, I think it's as many as 30 counties. And so there'll be one near you. I mean, you can obviously, click into whichever one you want that works with your schedule. But if you're doing the one that's in your county, that's probably better because you're going to hear from your county superintendent and it's going to have a local flavor to it that I think is important. And then, of course, we're going to be doing our Q&A off of that platform. The other thing that's good about it is it's only going to be an hour. We wanted it to be an hour because we know these things become really tedious when you start going over that amount of time. So it is going to get basically to the facts, not waste your time, focus on the things that you need to focus on. The PowerPoint will have more information than we can cover in an hour, but that's good for your reference point. And then obviously we'll take all your questions. But thanks, Tim, for giving me the opportunity to mention that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Andrea, I know the site community has a lot of resources and wonderful resources to offer. And I believe they can find those on the site page. We'll ask that with the email that goes out through Capital Advisors that maybe they put some links to some of those resources there. And Kevin, perhaps they'll have the registration links, of course, in that email as well, so people can make sure they register and attend the events next week. So with that, I just want to say any final thoughts, Andrea, from you as we had this big week. Any other things you wanted to sort of mention before we jump out?
We do have a member meetup on Tuesday afternoon at 3:00. We've been having these open meetings for people to ask questions, get answers. If anybody wants information on that, just email me directly. And I hope, again, you just, hang in there, everyone. I know the budget cuts look and feel just awful, but we've gotten through it before. We'll get through it again. We just got to stick together.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, we'll definitely appreciate your wisdom there. And Kevin, any final thoughts you want to wrap on for the week?
Just that, we've got a long process ahead of us. This now goes to, it's by no means is this the final deal. It goes to the legislature. I expect them, honestly, to try to moderate some of this a little bit. But then in addition to going to the legislature, we do have some hope that potentially the Congress will do something that will end up helping us out. My prediction is we are going to get some assistance out of the federal government. It's just hard to say what that amount's going to be and just how much we're going to be able to mitigate some of these cuts. But, we're going to keep you posted on these weekly updates. So it's good to be with you all again. And my thanks to Andrea and Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Just one quick reminder, everybody, there is a YouTube channel where you can subscribe and get these weekly updates as they're posted, and you'll get notified on your phone if you want them right away. So please jump on the YouTube channel. Lots of great support on there as well. And thank you so much, Andrea and Kevin, for sharing your expertise, and we'll look forward to syncing up with you next week in those budget workshops.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.